be being planned.
Indeed, you know, from a legal procedure point of view, it is the first step. And if we can draw any kind of parallels from the previous ministers that you were referring to, all of them went through a similar course, because from a legal perspective, what happens first is the general prosecutor feels there's enough cause of suspicion to order this travel ban, to order these assets frozen. Immediately afterward, the criminal court here in Egypt essentially either confirms that travel ban, agrees with it and sides with it, or can throw it out. That is unlikely. It hasn't done so in any of the previous cases, so we're not expecting that to happen. And then what happens immediately after that is that very same court then begins a criminal investigation into potential wrongdoings. And now what we have seen in the course of the previous ministers is that indictments have been filed against the former Minister of Interior, the former Minister of Housing, the former Minister of Tourism, and one of the major senior officials of the ruling National Democratic Party. They are all set to begin their trials in early March. So if you can draw parallels from those cases, we can expect that some kind of investigation will begin into alleged wrongdoings against the former president, and perhaps down the road, some type of indictments and charges filed against the former president, perhaps even his two sons.
Talking to somebody on this programme a short while ago, Ayman, from the Committee for the Return of Egypt's assets, all of its money, who was saying that in the last few days it had been noticed that Mubarak and his family had been shifting money abroad, and that this was the reason why this had happened. Have you heard of that?
Well, we've certainly heard the criticism against the delay into why it's taken this long for the general prosecutor to file these charges. And look, I mean, you got to look at it from one perspective of many of these activists who are upset with the delay, and that is, since the beginning of the revolution, January the 25th, perhaps even since the stepping down or the resignation of the former president, the general prosecutor has gone after so many of the key associates of the regime or close allies of the former president, and it's very difficult to assume, they argue, that the president would not have had knowledge of their very intimate workings in terms of the corruption and allegations that they are facing. So they're saying, well, why did they not impose this travel ban and impose the freezing of these assets immediately after President Mubarak stepped down? They're arguing that it gave the president and his family some time to perhaps even conceal these assets and these interests in foreign bank accounts. It gave them plenty of time to perhaps put them in different people's names and, again, conceal them deeper. No evidence of that yet, but that is the criticism, in that if the general prosecutor was genuine and sincere about trying to bring justice, he would have ordered this immediately after the president stepped down.
Thanks, Ayman. The Tunisian Industry and Technology Ministers quit, according to the country's official media. Mohamed Afif Chelbi was one of only two ministers remaining from under former President Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali. The interim Prime Minister Mohamed Ghannouchi has been replaced now by the former government minister AlBaji Qaid Al-Sebsi. Nadim Baba reports.
A surprise announcement as Tunisia's interim president names a new prime minister.
At this critical moment, in order to maintain our national interest and to ensure that the state is up and running with all its institutions, I requested Mr. Baja Qaid Sibsi to assume the office of Prime Minister, and he thankfully accepted this responsibility.
AlBaji Qaid Al-Sebsi is 84 and a former foreign minister. He served under Tunisia's post-independence leader Habib Bourguiba and under President Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali. His appointment came hours after interim Premier Mohamed Ghannouchi unexpectedly stepped down.
I am not prepared to be the person who takes decisions which result in the loss of life.
The move comes at a tense time for Tunisia. Sunday saw new clashes between protesters and security forces in Tunis. Several people have reportedly been killed on the streets of the capital since Friday. Mohamed Ghannouchi took over as premier on the 14th of January after President Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia following weeks of protests. Critics say that since the Jasmine Revolution, there's not been real reform, and Ghannouchi's replacement is unlikely to change that.
He's out of touch, he's out of time, he's belonging other generation. What the Tunisian youth need today, who someone will be able to represent them, who someone will be able to respond to their legitimate demands.
Mohamed Ghannouchi has repeated the government's pledge to hold elections by mid-July. But almost 200 people have been arrested over the weekend. It's not clear how far the new Prime Minister can quell the anger on the streets. Nadeem Barber, Al Jazeera.
In Jordan, opposition leaders are continuing to demand a faster pace of reform, despite the promise of new laws earlier this year from the Prime Minister. Supporters of King Abdullah gathered in Amman on Sunday, at least 5,000 showing their allegiance to the crown. The loyalist rally was after opposition protests that had been held on 8 consecutive Fridays. In the Omani city of Sohar, a major supermarket looks as though it's on fire after it had been looted, apparently, according to witnesses. This is where 6 people are supposed to have died yesterday. Protesters apparently blocking 2 roads on the way to the country's biggest port. A doctor said those who lost their lives in the north had done so during clashes with police. However, the health minister says 1 person died and that 20 were injured. In Bahrain, a parliament meeting has been cancelled. Protesters stopping upper chamber members from reaching the entrance to the building. Rallies have been held in key Manama locations, putting pressure on the monarchy for change. King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa has reshuffled his cabinet and wants talks with the opposition. Now to Yemen. The opposition, they're rejecting a unity government, the idea of it, with the President Ali Abdullah Saleh. An opposition coalition of political groups and anti-government protesters still want the president to stand down. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people have been protesting about his leadership. So let's bring in Hashim Akhabara, joining us from Sana'a. Do you notice a new intensity about these demonstrations, as though everything appears perhaps to be coming to a head?
Well, we're expecting to see very, very tense moments ahead over the last few hours, and particularly tomorrow, when thousands of protesters are expected to march on the main streets of the capital and across the country, asking for Ali Abdullah Saleh to stand down. And the momentum is expected also to rise, particularly now that the opposition has rejected his call for a national unity government. People here are saying that Ali Abdullah Saleh has to understand that this is not time about quick fixes, but he has to understand that the wave of change which is sweeping the Arab world is about presidents to go, not about consensus with the opposition.
Yeah, but why no to a national unity government? Because in some ways it might be better for the opposition and the demonstrators to be working on the inside rather than trying to push everything down. At least that would be the argument coming from some quarters.
Primarily because of a huge deficit trust here in Yemen about this government and about the political elite. There's been some attempts by the Americans and the Europeans over the last 2 years to try to bridge the gap between the opposition and President Ali Abdullah Saleh. So Al Jazeera understands that at a certain point the opposition told Ali Abdullah Saleh, if you would like us to trust you, you have to fire some of your relatives who hold very sensitive positions in the government. Then you have to tell us exactly on paper, when are you going to step aside and how are you going to do that? Ali Abdullah Saleh came back to them and he said, these are the guarantees. I will release political prisoners as of tomorrow. I will appoint a new body to oversee constitutional reforms, and I will appoint a national unity government to show you that I'm genuine about these things. Now the opposition is telling him that the problem is that the people, the thousands of people who are listening to us, who have been inspired by us, are telling us that we have not to listen to you at this particular moment, and that you have to understand that you have to go. There's nothing we could do about this momentum which is building up in Yemen, which is about regime change, not about a national unity government. However, the rejection also could drag the country into further uncertainty, because we don't know exactly what happens in the future if suddenly Ali Abdullah Saleh decides to step aside without laying the ground for a transitional period to look after one of the most critical moments of the history of Yemen, which is one of the most difficult countries in this part of the world, given the very complex reality and the power of the tribes in this country.
Thank you, Hashim. Malaysia's media crackdown coming up in just a moment. There are those who fear limits on the internet and on free speech.
And the Oscar goes to Colin Firth.
Natalie Portman, The King's Speech.
The big night out offers up few surprises, as The King's Speech is the big winner.
As the dry condition extends over Amritsar, we'll find the right flavour to tempt your palate.
Hello again. In the western parts of the states, it's very, very chilly at the moment, and it will stay cold over the next few days. The air's all gradually sinking down from Canada. Elsewhere, though, it's very hot. That's in the southeast corner, and where these two air masses meet, that's where we have a problem with heavy, thundery downpours, and we're also seeing a few tornadoes at the moment too. Now, this system is gradually going to work its way down into the southeast corner for Tuesday, so the thunderstorms just over Florida, really, as we head through the day. Behind it, an awful lot cooler and fresher than it has been. Washington, D.C. this time no higher than around 10 degrees, and Atlanta no higher than around 17. It's also fresher for many of us across Europe now too. In the northwest, it has been getting over double figures, but now we'll just be around 7 degrees there, I think, as we head through Tuesday. And for Moscow, it'll still be cool here as well. Our top temperature struggling to -12. Across the Mediterranean, though, that's where the unsettled weather is. An area of low pressure is giving very heavy downpours, strong winds as well. Rome at best looking at a top temperature of 10 degrees, wet and windy too. And that wet and windy weather will still be with us in the northern parts of Africa. AlJazeera seeing a top temperature of 12, a cooler day in Tripoli, 15 degrees, and it will be windy here too.
Qatar Airways, world's 5-star airline.
Now there's one place to discover the whole story. AlJazeera.net/English.
We bring you the story from every side and every angle. AlJazeera.net/English.
A popular uprising that shook the country to its core. A defiant president under siege from his people. As the protesters took charge of the streets, we look back at the events that are changing Egypt.
I will stay on the air if I can until the police come.
In a special program, Al Jazeera gives you a day-by-day account from those that witnessed them firsthand. Egypt burning, at this time on Al Jazeera.
David Foster with you here on Al Jazeera. Recap the top stories for you. Those people protesting in the Libyan city of Benghazi, some of them at least, may well be heading towards Tripoli to help troops fighting the leader Muammar Gaddafi. Pictures out of Tripoli itself or nearby appear to show Gaddafi's son, Saif, arming civilians to help keep them control of the capital, Tripoli. The Reuters news agency is reporting anti-Gaddafi demonstrations in the capital. However, the protesters were chased away by government troops firing into the air. Now, Yemen's headline, the opposition there saying it won't be joining a unity government. The president was expected to announce that it would happen within hours. The opposition coalition of political groups and anti-government protesters want the president out at all costs, it says. And Egypt's prosecutor general's imposed a travel ban on former President Hosni Mubarak and his family, and he's ordered a freeze on all their financial assets inside the country. Let's talk to Hossam Al-Hamalawi, an Egyptian journalist and activist, one of those who took part in the protests. I know we've had you on the programme before talking about what you wanted. When it comes to Mubarak, does this go far enough for the time being for you?
No, it's not far enough. We want to see Mubarak in a cage, in a court, getting prosecuted, not just for corruption, but for murder and treason and for ruling this country for 30 years using torture chambers.
I'm awfully sorry to have to interrupt you after such a short answer. You may understand why we want to hear what Hillary Clinton has to say about events
as well as during the special
in the larger Middle East and North Africa.
Today, the world's eyes are fixed on Libya. We have seen Colonel Gaddafi's security forces open fire on peaceful protesters again and again. They have used heavy weapons on unarmed civilians. Mercenaries and thugs have been turned loose to attack demonstrators. There are reports of soldiers executed for refusing to turn their guns on their fellow citizens, of indiscriminate killings, arbitrary arrests, and torture. Colonel Gaddafi and those around him must be held accountable for these acts, which violate